Hi, this is going to be our first YouTube video for English 132. Um, I hope by now you've seen Rushmore and read the screenplay. To begin by talking about Wes Anderson, the director. Um, he's made probably about a dozen movies. He's pretty well known, um, well respected, director. I should begin by saying hi because I haven't seen any of you in a while, and that sounds like I'm not going to see you. You'll see me, but I won't see you, which is too bad. I was really enjoying that class. I'm going to miss the discussions. Uh, YouTube videos will not be discussions; they'll just be me talking at you. So, well, here we go. Anyway, Wes Anderson. Um, has about a dozen different movies. Rushmore was his second movie. 1996, he had a very funny movie called Bottle Rocket, which I really love. And then came Rushmore, um, The Royal Tenenbaums, The Life Aquatic, Darjeeling Limited, Fantastic Mr. Fox, Moonrise Kingdom, Grand Budapest Hotel, and then a year or two ago, Isle of Dogs. So, um, yeah, here's a picture of him at about the time when he was making Rushmore. Um, Look at those glasses. What kind of a moron would wear glasses like that? Anyway, he looks like a kid, um, and he was in his 20s, but he's just kind of a boyish-looking guy. Anyway, enough about him. Um, I want to begin talking about the movie by setting it up with a discussion about um, genre. We've been talking about genre before. I don't have a chalkboard. I don't have a whiteboard. We have a whiteboard somewhere in this family, but it's who knows where it is. Nobody can find it, so I have this stupid blue board instead. But here we go. So we'll see how this works. We've been talking about genre. Genre is a type of writing, right? Or in this case, a type of film. And it's useful to think about genres because, um, genres have sort of a formula to them. And then if you know what the formula is, then you can see um, what the director or the writer is doing with that formula. They're working in the formula, but modifying it in this way and that way. It helps you to understand, helps you to think of the movie kind of from the director's perspective. You can think about how a filmmaker makes the movie. Okay, anyway, a couple of different genres that I'm going to want to discuss are romantic comedy and coming of age story. Right? Usually, stories, movies fit into more than one genre. There may be one dominant genre. A movie may be a horror movie or a western or a comedy, or it's easy to imagine that a movie could be all three of those. Documentary, a movie could be a martial arts movie, um, tragedy. There's no end to the genres. Think of the categories in Netflix, right? But to look at the romantic comedy, we can talk about some of the different elements of the romantic comedy formula. First of all, there's the plot, which goes from order let's say this. It goes from disorder to order. Right? A comic plot in the kind of classic, like Shakespearean understanding of comedy. Um, I need to step back a little bit. Plays are social, right? They're about live people on stage acting out human situations. Um, and plays are typically about people's relationships because what they show is people speaking back and forth with each other, and usually they're trying to sort out their relationships. And so, a comedy usually, um, what makes a comic ending classically is that things come together in a so-called happy ending, right? There's some kind of order at the end. The good people get rewarded and the bad people get punished, and that's how it should be, and that is satisfying. But there has to be disorder in order for this to be a satisfying change, right? Very often, though, the story doesn't just begin with disorder, but it might begin with an orderly world that becomes disordered and then becomes orderly again by the end, right? Of course, that's the comedy part of the story. The romantic part um, is that it's a love story, right? Um, so a love story about two people who fall in love with each other um, can't just be about how the couple gets along well. There has to be conflict, and there has to be um, some kind of um, tension between the different characters. There has to be some kind of obstacles, right? Something that's keeping them from having their relationship the way it should be. So, um, some common obstacles in a comedy, they call it a blocking agent. It's something that's blocking the two people from getting together. Um, Commonly, they might initially dislike each other, and so you know what that's like. Oh, I got a piece of fuzz on my hat here. I can't find it. There it is. Um, Commonly, at the beginning of a romantic comedy, you have the two main characters in some kind of situation like, oh, one's coming around the corner of a grocery store pushing a grocery cart and accidentally rams into somebody else's grocery cart, and then they both start reaching for the same box of Cheerios, and they get into a fight, and you and the audience know immediately that these two people are going to fall in love at the end of the movie. That's what the movie's going to be about. It doesn't work that way in real life, um, but in movies, that's kind of the formula. So there could be one obstacle could be that the couple initially doesn't like each other. Um, another is another obstacle is that there could be some kind of social disapproval, some kind of taboo or law in society that keeps these two people from being together. The Romeo and Juliet kind of story. The two families disapprove of their being together, um, or maybe one character is much older than the other, or something like that. Um, there can sometimes be rivalries. There's more than one person interested in the main character, or vice versa. Um, there is sometimes just the personalities of the two of the couple um, don't match well. They're kind of a mismatched couple, and they wouldn't be the kind of people that you would think would go together, right? Um, So if we think about if we think about Rushmore, I think you have nearly all of those things going on. You have, first of all, um, Miss Cross. You have a rivalry between Miss Cross and Max and Mr. Bloom, right? Mr. Bloom and Max are competing for Miss Cross. So there's that kind of conflict that has to be resolved. Um, there's initial dislike. Um, in the end, Max ends up with Margaret Yang, but when they first meet, she seems to like him and he doesn't like her. By the end, that changes. Um, Mr. Bloom and Miss Cross um, fall out of love with each other, but then come back together at the end. Um, there's the social prohibition thing, the social disapproval thing, because of course Max is a student and Miss Cross is a teacher, and that kind of a relationship can't happen. Um, and she's also older than him. The relationship between Bloom and Miss Cross, he's married, right? And so he shouldn't be with her. He's also older, although they're both adults, so it's less significant. Um, yeah. So in the end, um, we get also the mismatched couples, of course, Max and Miss Cross. Aside from all the social disapproval, they're a ridiculous mismatch. They don't go together. Anyway, so in the end, things are set right. The people who are pursuing the wrong boyfriend or girlfriend end up with somebody more appropriate. Mr. Bloom divorces his wife who's been cheating on him and gets together with Miss Cross. And Max, who's been pursuing Miss Cross, gives up on that and um, takes up with Margaret Yang. Right. So in the end, things are sorted out. Right. And relationships between couples are the basic sort of, you could say that it's kind of the building blocks of society, is that people make connections with, especially with another person, and then often form a family out of that, and society is kind of built out of those those relationships, those bricks. um, and so the classical comedy often ends with a wedding, right? And in fact, um, a dance, often, with weddings, wedding receptions, there is a dance. And in this case, we don't have a wedding, but we have the movie ending with a play. But then there's a dance in the after party, right? And why do romantic comedies end with dancing so often? Well, again, romantic comedies are about relationships um, and things working out, right? So that if you're dancing with somebody, you're performing certain steps, and the other person has certain steps that they're supposed to perform, kind of in response to or along with you. And if the two of you kind of follow the socially approved pattern, the dance, the way it's supposed to go, then it works out, right? It's this nice kind of enjoyable mutual thing. Um, and that's like a relationship. There's a way that society um, tells you that a relationship should go, and if you play your role and the other person plays their role, then it's like a dance, and it's the two parts fit together, and it's graceful and fun and predictable and so forth. So, yeah, this movie ends with a dance, and you have people, um, um, looks like even Mr. Um, Fisher is possibly interested in the math teacher, etc. There's lots of couples getting together. All right, so enough about enough about romantic comedy. about the romance part of the comedy. Let's talk about the comedy part of the romance. Um, what is it that makes something funny? Well, that's a good question. Philosophers have tried to explain that for a long time. But humor, there are some things that we can say about humor. First of all, um, things that are incongruous. Whoops. Incongruities. That's an adjective there. Things that are incongruous that you might remember from your geometry classes. Congruent triangles, things that are kind of adjacent to each other. They fit together. Um, things that are incongruous don't fit together. And when two things um, are brought together that don't belong together, we laugh. Why is that? Well, that's a good question. Humor is a very strange thing. It's a very strange thing. Uh, Certain situations are presented, and a person begins to make this kind of, they show their teeth and ha ha ha. They do this kind of barking noise. It's a very strange thing. But um, if you're experiencing laughter, it makes perfect sense. But from the outside, it's a strange thing. Anyway, a classic form of humor, classic source of humor is incongruities, things that don't fit together. So, again, mismatched couples like Max and Miss Cross, that's a funny relationship because it's absurd. The two don't belong together, right? And then um, when Max is friends with Mr. Bloom, that seems absurd. This 15-year-old hanging out with a 45-year-old. And then his other friend is a fourth grader, Dirk. So, the three of them hanging out together is absurd, right? There's there are lots of incongruities and absurdities like that in the movie. Just one, for example, in the cop drama play near the beginning of the movie, um, Dirk is dressed as a nun, but he's actually an undercover cop, and the nun's habit is his cover. So the absurdity is that here's this little kid who's supposed to be an FBI agent who's dressed as a nun. It's taking these three different strange identities and putting them together so that you end up with, um, a little boy in a nun's habit, pow, shooting somebody on a subway. That's funny, right? Things are not so funny when you explain them analytically like that, but it is a funny thing. All right. Another aspect of comedy, surprisingly enough, is the presence of death. Right? There's often some reminders of death in a comedy, and that's, you might not, that might surprise you, but it's true if you think about it. In this case, of course, Max's mother is dead. Edward Appleby, that's Miss Cross's um, husband, he's also dead. Um, Max lives next door to a cemetery. Dr. Guggenheim has a serious stroke and he's in a coma. You know, the movie is trying to remind you that people are mortal, that we die, right? And the reason why that's important in a comedy, you'd think, well, you shouldn't have that in a comedy. Comedy should only be about happy, funny things. But a comedy, in order for the ending to be satisfying, for it to be, a happy ending, there has to be a real chance for it to go wrong, um, for things to go badly, for people to die. And so, you know, when it works out well at the end, then we're relieved and we laugh, right? there's one scene um, where um, Max cuts the brakes in Mr. Bloom's car, and that's kind of a tense scene. And he ends up at Rushmore with his car rolling towards the groundskeeper and some little kids, and it works out okay in the end. But that's kind of that's frightening, right? There's also a scene where um, Max is suddenly buying a case of dynamite, and he has a rifle, and he tells Dirk, "I'm going to Rushmore. I have one more piece of business to take care of." And so, what are you supposed to think when you see that? An angry kid like Max, he's shown that he's angry and kind of irrational. He's got a gun. He's going to Rushmore, and then it turns out that it's only a BB gun, and he shoots Magnus, the bully, in his ear, and um, that's funny. We laugh because Magnus is he swears, he holds his ear, Fisher, um, and it's funny because we don't like him and we like to see him suffer, but it's also funny because it's not. There's some relief that it was not. Um, no one died. It was not the kind of um, mortal violence that it seemed like it might be. Also, Max shoots him from up in this window in a stone building. It's almost like a castle, and so you can see that he's completely safe, right? Um, all right. So the other reason why um, comedies, romantic comedies, remind us about death and the chance that people can actually die, is that that's what makes um, relationships between people so valuable. Right? If we're immortal, then things just wouldn't mean very much, right? But the fact that when you find somebody and you fall in love and you really like that person, and you know that it's only temporary because eventually you're going to die, or you have a pet that you love, and you're most likely going to outlive your pet, knowing that they're only going to be with you for a few years, makes it intense and valuable. Um, there's that old expression that scarcity creates value. Scarcity creates value. Things are only valuable if they're scarce, right? Why is gold valuable? Because you can't find very much of it. Um, Scarcity creates scarcity. Scarcity creates value. Um, um, and so, the fact that life is short is what makes it valuable. If you knew you were going to live forever, life would begin to be a drag, right? I think, because you'd think, oh my God, I'm going to be doing this forever. Nothing would mean very much because because you have an infinite number of days. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well, but think about it. The last genre I want to discuss here is the coming of age story. This one we don't have as much to say about. Coming of age. Well, to be of age means to be an adult, right? Um, if you're of age, then you can vote and you can drink and you can do all those other things. So a coming of age story is about someone um, making that passage from childhood to adulthood. And that's an important transition that everyone goes through if they live long enough. And it's interesting. Um, lots of times what stories are about is change. We talked at the beginning of the semester about dynamic characters and static characters. Dynamic characters are ones that are different at the end. They change over the course of the story. Um, that's interesting. You know, people do change, but they don't change easily, and it's a complex process. And so stories about people changing tend to be very interesting to us. And this passage from childhood to adulthood is a common theme for a story. So in this case, you know, we have Max. He's an adolescent, right? Um, we don't see a long stretch of his life. We just see 5 months of his life, and he's 15 years old. You know, he's I can't write a five upside down. All right, he's 15 years old. Um, he's he's not a kid. When you're 15, you're not a kid anymore, and you're not really an adult. He's kind of halfway between 10 and 20. He's right in the middle of um, his adolescence. So it's hard to say what his identity is, which is a frustrating and I don't know. I thought kind of an embarrassing, humiliating thing when I was that age. And he's a sophomore at Rushmore. Um, when I was a sophomore in high school, my English teacher, my mean English teacher, told us what the word sophomore means. Sopho, it's Greek, like philosophy or sophisticated. It's about wisdom, and this part, more, is like moron. Um, so this is sophomore is a literally a wise fool. Um, and when you're 15 years old, you're not a freshman anymore. You're not new to things, but you're still not not so smart, right? So you're kind of balancing between the two worlds there. Um, all right. So in another video, we'll talk about the different conflicts between the main characters, and that'll bring out a lot of the themes. Um, and this is all, of course, to get ready for a paper, which is going to be due at the end of the week, Friday. And I intend to put up another YouTube video tomorrow, probably early in the day. That'll give you a few days to think about the paper, to turn in a draft on Friday. And then again, that draft will be just a first draft that I'll put comments on and get back to you, and you'll have a week from then to revise. All right. I hope you're still awake. It's different when I'm doing all the talking. I can see how that would be. It'd be easy for that to become monotonous for you. But I'm glad for all of you who are sticking with it and going to finish the semester. I'm glad you are, and let me know if I can do anything to help you with that. See, that class is over. See you tomorrow.